joining us. I hope you enjoy this evening. I'm going to ask Katie, who's our student director, to explain to you why Kathleen has been our chosen guest for tonight. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie, student director of the center, as Jane said. I know some of you, I think. I'm a junior here at Georgetown. I've been here for about 3 years, and pretty much since I was a freshman, I've been going to the meditation center. And for about a year and a half now, I've been the student director. And so one of, I think, the privileges of being in that position and seeing the center grow from its infancy, because when I was a freshman, this was the first year that it was really at Georgetown, accessible on campus. I've gotten to make a few observations. One, or a major thing, is the paradox of the center that I don't necessarily see, but I think a lot of people have expressed in various ways. So one is, you have this center on Georgetown's campus that's for meditation, spirituality, and a religious dialogue. And everyone, when I tell them that, they say, oh, that's fantastic, that's great. But you can hear this little bit of incredulity in their voice. They're like, really? Kids actually go to that? And they remember when they were in college, or they think back to what they view college as, and it's hard to imagine that students actually take time from their homework, their extracurriculars, their parties, their social life, all of those things that take up so much time, to just sit in silence for 20 minutes. It seems paradoxical. It doesn't seem like it would actually make sense. Another thing I hear is that if I tell my peers that I'm the student director, they say, oh, I've always wanted to go there, that's so cool. And then they never show up. Which I think kind of illustrates that the first paradox I'm talking about, in that I think that students see it and they look and they see something like meditation as an ideal or an idea that they enjoy, that they think they would like, but they can't make the connection between that abstract idea of meditation, that concept they have in their head, and the rest of their life. And certainly, you can feel the contrast when you go to any of you who've meditated in the meditation center. You can feel the contrast. You walk into a little building, and there's a different feel to the air. There's a different pace. There's a different kind of environment that you're stepping into. And I think that contrast is what is very important. But when we were talking about what we wanted to do what we wanted the topic of this lecture to be, we have this every semester, we were really thinking about that, how to make what we do at the center relevant to students in their everyday life. And I'm sure many of you here are at least semi-regular meditators, or at least you have exposure to the practice, or else you probably wouldn't have heard of it. And so you know that when you come out of a meditation session, especially a particularly good one, we're not supposed to judge them, but we all know that there's some particularly good ones. Everything just feels more vivid and like more alive, and you can kind of tune into the spirit of the universe in a more meaningful way. At least I felt that. Very rarely, not all the time, but there are those times when you feel that because you spent that time in meditation, you can experience the world around you more vividly. And unfortunately, I mean, that's not something you can explain to someone who's never meditated. And that's not necessarily even something people would, I don't know, consider as a reason to come to the meditation center. It's like, well, I can do that on my own. I don't need to take the time and sit for 20 minutes. I have things to do. But I think the point of this talk today and what we really want to bring out is that connection that we have, the fact that a meditation practice brings clarity and connection into other parts of your life, not just when you're sitting in silence. And I think especially on a college campus, of course that's the experience I'm speaking from. When you're on a college campus and you have only 24 hours a day and 28 hours worth of work to do, and then you need to sleep sometime as well, it's hard to take the time to meditate. But another thing that I've noticed in my peers is that there is a very strong sense of social justice and a very strong orientation towards those types of work. And for example, I'm an international health major, and so a lot of people in my classes are going on to do service work in developing countries. They're going on to work in policy to mend some of the inequities that we see in the world. And so I see, especially on Georgetown campus, a very strong leaning towards those sorts of activities. But I know from my experience in meditation that those sorts of activities and those sorts of giving yourself to others comes best when you are stable within yourself, if that makes any sense. And it comes best when you do what you need to do, but you have the opportunity and you make the space for a reflection or for a meditation afterwards. And so I'll stop talking soon, but I think that the point of this talk tonight, and the reason I'm really glad that Kathleen was able to take time out of her schedule to come talk to us, is that hopefully at the end of this we can all see a little more clearly where these things overlap, and how a practice like meditation, which seems so solitary and I don't know, even useless sometimes if you're looking at it from like an outside view, really is important in clarifying the life we're living and the experiences we're having, especially if we're involved in work that's meant to help others. And so without further ado, you can all look at this quite lengthy introduction of Kathleen Messweiger in your program. Suffice to say that she has had a very long and illustrious career and is very well versed in issues of social justice and spirituality meditation. And so I think this will be a very interesting talk. And Kathleen, thank you very much for coming.
I'm tempted to say Katie said everything I was about to say and did it shorter, but since she did ask me to do this, I'm delighted. So first I want to begin by saying thank you to Katie and to Jane and Dennis McCall, who is not here, for the invitation to give this lecture. I was asked before, now Kathleen, this is kind of informal, isn't it? I said, well, I did write it, but I think it's very friendly, so I'm hoping you will think the same as well. What I'd like to do is to talk about my journey in the struggle for justice and the role that meditation has played and does play in that. I want to share some insights I have gained along that long career, at least, in the hopes that they might match some of your own or spark your thinking so that we can have a conversation about, as the title of my talk says, the struggle for justice, meditation, and meaning. Some of you know I'm a Trinitarian, so I have indeed arranged my comments around three themes: the essential call to justice, the essential call to prayer, and justice, meditation, and meaning. First part. When I was a child, not to worry, I'm not going year by year or anything like that, I first learned about what we called in the Catholic world I grew up in, pagan babies. You may not have heard of them, but we raised money for them in the Catholic grade school I attended in St. Paul, Minnesota. Pink boxes for girls and blue boxes for boys. I really didn't know what it meant exactly. Some kids living in far-off lands that I would never meet, but that I had some obligation to help. And giving money was one way. Someone would be able to go to the pagan babies and help them learn about God and God's love for them. That was the beginning of the global framework that I've come to love. Giving pennies in grade school collections was supplemented by classes and masses where we learned more about the human family and how we were called to care about and work for our sisters and brothers wherever they were. Now that call could be answered in many ways, to be sure, but it wasn't really an option. You couldn't just say, oh, too bad about the poor people in Latin America or India, it's too hard to think about them. No, that wasn't right. It didn't mean, on the other hand, that you had to drop everything and go to one of those foreign lands and join them in the work there. So the challenge became how to hear the call for me, for my life, how to be open to it, willing to respond to it. This is where the wonderful concept of discernment comes in. I am, after all, at a Jesuit university. I think many of you know it, but I want to just remind all of us that this method of prayer for making choices in the context of faith was for Ignatius a process, as George Traub describes it in Do You Speak Ignatian? And I quote, that involves prayer, reflection, and consultation with